co-owner and co-founder of Brainbridge in Manhattan Beach. I thought I'd give you my background to kind of understand my area of expertise. So I've always been interested in psychology and kids with learning disabilities, and got my bachelor's in psychology and then went straight on and got my master's in marriage and family therapy. So I actually did my internship with Dr. Maxwell, and I worked with kids with learning disabilities doing talk therapy. And as I started doing it, I realized that I wasn't great at it, because all I wanted to do was kind of jump in and give solutions. Meaning, if someone was talking about how sad they were that they failed their test because they didn't read the directions correctly, I wanted to teach them how to read the directions correctly. So I kind of veered off and did my own thing and opened Brainbridge with my business partner, Brittany. We've been open for about 5 years now, and we do two things. One, we do cognitive training. We train the brain. So we're essentially doing attention training, processing speed training, auditory processing, visual processing training, and that's all one-on-one. And that kind of helps build those foundational skills, those kind of building blocks that you need at an early age to learn. The other thing that we do, and this is primarily where I come in, is I teach you skills and strategies and techniques to make school and life easier, essentially putting tools in the learning toolbox to pull when you feel stuck. So my background is, I'm not a clinician and I'm not a doctor, but I am trained in these programs, and I see a lot of kids, and I even see adults too. With that being said, I would say our most popular demographic by far are kids with ADHD. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I thought what I do is kind of talk about the main questions or concerns that always get brought up in consultations or on phone calls when I first start talking to you. So I thought I'd kind of address those areas. This is my handout. I only give it to you just so you can kind of have an outline of what I'm going to talk about, because I'm kind of going to jump around a little bit. I wanted to preface by saying that ADHD is not a one-size-fits-all diagnosis. I'm sure you guys all know that, but what works for one parent might not work for another parent, and that's okay. And what the strategies I give you today, maybe you'll take one and they'll work, and maybe the other ones don't work. But I think if you start to kind of accept that it's more trial and error, then you open up a whole new world of possibilities. So just keep that in mind, that just because something might have worked for your one child, it might not work for the other, or just because it worked for someone else's best friend, it might not work for you. So the number one question I get asked the most is about medication. Again, I am not a psychiatrist. You can refer to Dr. Braslov for specific questions, but I thought I'd just kind of tell you my point of view, because I do see a lot of children come in on meds and off of meds. A lot of times people will come see me because they don't want to do medication. They're trying to avoid it as much as they can, so they try to do brain training and strategy building. Oftentimes we have kids who are still on medication, but it doesn't solve all the problems. So my first thing that I want to make clear is that medication is not the magic pill. It does not cure ADHD. And I think sometimes parents think, if I give that to you, everything will be great and we don't need to do anything else. I don't think that's usually the case. But at the same time, I have a lot of parents who just completely say, no meds ever, I never want to try it, I'm too scared. I would say to keep an open mind with medication. If you find the right psychiatrist, I think that you can try different meds, and it's an interesting trial, at least. I've had kids whose parents refused to put them on meds for years and years. The minute they started trying medication, it really made a big difference. So never say never. With that being said, I've also typically seen that it's usually trial and error when it comes to trying out medication. So if your child has tried 2 medications and they've had really bad side effects, or you haven't seen a difference, keep trying. You don't have to completely rule it out. And so don't be afraid to experiment with that. At the same time, if you tried and nothing is working, there are all alternatives like diet, exercise, brain training, educational therapists, mindfulness, exercise that can be used to help treat ADD. I find that medication works the best when you use other interventions. So if you are having behavioral issues, take the meds and go see a behavioral therapist. What it does is it helps you absorb whatever treatment you're using more. So it won't teach your child how to read, but it might help them sit in the lesson when they're learning how to read. So keep an open mind. And then lastly, I would say, please go to a psychiatrist that's going to monitor your child and monitor, especially when you first start taking medication. I personally think going to a psychiatrist is better than just going to the pediatrician because they're so busy. But especially at the beginning, you want to be checking in every day with your child about side effects. You want to see how they're feeling, and you want a psychiatrist that's going to check in with you. So avoid anyone that goes, okay, I'll see you in 4 months, especially at the beginning. So that's my little take on medication, but that's at least what I see from my point of view. So even if we have medication, like I said, it doesn't solve all of our problems. So this is where I kind of come in. So one of the biggest frustrations I get is my child won't do their tasks. They what I call, they won't tackle the to-dos. So that's morning routines, bedtime routines, chores, and starting homework or starting a project. How many of you kind of have experienced that? Okay, so and it's frustrating. It's frustrating for all involved. It's tough for the kiddo, and it's tough for you guys because can't you just get started? Or we've done this a million times. So one of the things I really want you guys to keep in mind is about your child's learning style. So this is what kind of the philosophy that I come from, is I try to figure out what your child's learning style is. And you can figure it out too by observing them. You can also talk to a teacher. But we have kind of the traditional, how do you like information presented to you? So that's the auditory, okay, you learn through your ears, the visual, you learn through your eyes, the kinesthetic, tactile, hands-on learning. And you can have a combo or all three, but usually there's a preferred learning style. And as Dr. Maxwell said, visual or tactile is usually more popular, auditory is the least popular, except for some reason school is still taught so verbally, which I find so interesting, especially when we get into college and it's all lecture-based. So keeping that in mind, when you are coming up with systems, keep that in the back of your head. If your child doesn't like to process things with their ears, don't tell them directions verbally. It's just going to go in one ear and out the other, and then you're going to get frustrated, and they're going to get frustrated because you're mad at them. So don't relay information that way. Conversely, if your child has trouble reading, don't give them a checklist that has words on it. It's going to be overwhelming. They're going to avoid the checklist. So the other type of learning style that we work with is what kind of information do you like presented to you? So this breaks it down a little bit more. Do you like figural information? This is picture-based information. If your child likes Legos or Minecraft or doing puzzles, this is a figural learner. And typically we're figural learners in the first part of our education, which is why so much of kindergarten and first grade is color coding and shapes and whatnot. But keep that in mind when you are, keep this in mind when you're creating lists. So we have our figural and then our symbolic learners. This is numbers and letters type learning. So someone who likes math is a symbolic learner. Someone who gravitates towards Sudoku or Wheel of Fortune is a symbolic learner. And numbers feel good to them. Last would be a semantic learner. So this is extended verbal information. This is how school is primarily taught as you get older. This is reading, written expression. If you were to equate it to a puzzle, semantic learning, so a semantic learner would want to solve a riddle. Sometimes that's for someone who's a figural learner, like a riddle would be like, no way, or word math problems are very semantic. So I bring this up because it's really important to create your systems around these learning styles.
I'm sorry, could you just say the learning styles again?
Oh, sure, and they're on your handout as well, but the figural is more picture-based, so figures. And then the symbolic is symbols like letters and numbers, and semantic is words like a riddle. So one of the things I always tell people is if you're going to create a checklist, keep this in mind. So for example, if your child is a figural learner, avoid words. So maybe have little clip art for a morning routine of someone brushing their teeth, then someone eating breakfast, then someone putting on their clothes. Avoid times too. Don't say you have to do it at this time. Kind of just you can even color code it or put little words, but nothing that's going to overwhelm the brain. If your child is a symbolic learner, you can kind of do a traditional checklist but have it numbered, and I would say even have it like subcategories of that number. And if you like numbers, you can put the actual time. So at 7 o'clock, you're going to do this. At 7:05, we'll do this. Now, it's hard to stick with that, of course, but it just gives them an idea of planning and prioritizing. Symbolic learners also do well with timers. If you're a semantic learner, for checklists, you can do more traditional checklists. 1, brush teeth. 2, put on your pajamas. But I would say to kind of, you can write even priority next to it, and the time frames, but again, not specific times for semantic learners. And I have this all down here. If you have more questions about specific lists, I can give you advice on that. But I think keeping that in mind as you put these systems into place can really be helpful. So as we are completing tasks, there's so much executive functioning skills that go into it. We have task initiation, memory, planning, prioritizing, attention, and motivation. We could talk about those all day long, but I'm going to talk about 2 in particular that are kind of not discussed as much when we talk about completing tasks. One is breaking down directions. So how do we break down things that we have to do into smaller, more manageable chunks? So when you tell a child to clean their room, for someone who can't break down directions, that's a loaded statement. What do you mean clean my room? Where do I start? What do I do? I'm not going to do it. So let's start with, okay, the first step. Let's pick up all the trash and put it in a trash bag. Okay, done. Okay. All right, let's pick up our socks and put them in the top drawer. All right, let's put our clothes away and fold them. And now that the surfaces are clean, we can make our bed and dust. Whatever else is there, but so breaking it into smaller, more manageable steps. And if they can only start with the first one, that's great, but it's better than not doing anything. But again, saying, go clean your room, I would advise against it. It's too overwhelming. So keeping that in mind as far as breaking down directions. The next thing is sequencing, and Dr. Maxwell touched on this, but sequencing is a huge one. I would say that when we do our assessment, sequencing is probably one of the lowest areas that people score on. And I'll explain what it is, but it's so interesting to me because I just don't think it's taught in school, but it's something that we use every day, which is knowing when to do things and in what order. So you use sequencing a lot when you cook. You can't just make an egg. You have to get out the pan, heat it up, open the fridge, get the carton out, crack the egg. It takes a lot of steps. What I see with kids with ADD is most of them are lacking the sequencing skill completely. They don't know where to start, and that's when you see the feeling of stuckness and that frustration and the giving up and avoiding. So teaching sequencing skills is, I think, vital in their success. And I think as parents, this is where you can really come in and coach this for them and model it for them. Okay, I would start with this. What do you think we could do next? So really kind of develop an outline for them. I wouldn't just kind of throw them into it and say, do it yourself. I would model this behavior for them. So the sequencing could even be, we even use it when we're driving and we have to think about what lane we need to get into to do our next step. I tell kids the sequencing example is, would you put your pants on first or your shoes on first? I'm like, oh yeah, pants, that makes sense. So sequencing is, I think, the number one thing to look out for when you're trying to tackle these to-do lists. It also helps them prioritize and figure out where to start. Besides those 2 things with task initiation, getting homework done and projects, I know we've all probably read about the learning environment, where to do homework. And I'm sure we all have different opinions on this, but I think one of the biggest myths is that kids have to be in a distraction-free, quiet place. And I don't know about you, Dr. Maxwell, but I've seen kids who actually thrive with just a little bit of distraction. So music, TV on in the background, nothing that's very, very exciting, but just a cartoon or something. But someplace where they're a little stimulated. I know my business partner and I have completely different learning styles. She would have to be in a library with complete silence. If I was in a library, I'd look up every 2 minutes and see all the people walking around and I'd never get my work done. Same thing with kids with ADD. Sometimes being in that complete silence is just like, okay, what else can I get done? So just keep that in mind and experiment. It is okay to experiment. It's okay for it not to work, but try out different places in your house. With that being said, I've had a lot of kids who have auditory processing issues who are sitting at the kitchen table and they're just constantly complaining about mom is cooking dinner and banging the pots and pans and I cannot concentrate. So again, try different areas and get feedback from your child. Your child are the experts on themselves. Talk to them about what worked the most, what did you like, when did you feel like you were working the best or the fastest. So just keep that in mind as far as the environment and know that it's okay to experiment. Last part of completing homework assignments and projects, chunking information. So we're actually chunking this panel right now. We're going to do the two of us and then take a break and get our wiggles out, like you said, and then do the last two. Same thing with kids with ADD. I find I do chunking in my session. So I do 20 minutes of work, a 10-minute break, and 20 minutes of work. But knowing that in those 20 minutes, we have to work very hard. We can't get up, get water, tie our shoe, yawn 5 times. We can't waste time or else we lose that break. During that break is the time to go to the restroom, get water, and then we can play a game if there's time for that. Knowing that after those 10 minutes, we respect that and go back to the 20 minutes of work. You can fiddle around with the time. I think as you get older, you should be able to manage more sitting down. So you can do 45 minutes and 15 minutes, but chunking I think is really helpful in when you start to get a lot of homework, which I feel like the homework is just getting worse and worse nowadays as far as how much time is expected. So I would not expect your child to just sit there for 2 hours and get work done, but knowing that you have that out, that break can really help sometimes. So keep those in mind for tackling the to-dos. The next part I wanted to talk about, and it kind of falls into place with this, but is consistency. To me, consistency is the key to improvement. If you are going to develop routines, make sure that they're routines and systems you can actually stick with, both you and your child. I will say that most of the time, the people who are dropping the ball are the parents. And of course, you have a lot going on, and that makes sense, but our smart ADD kids read right through that. You know, they can kind of manipulate the system, or figure out the loopholes in your system. So what I would tell you is, more than anything, pick simple systems that you can actually follow through with. And if you're going to do a punishment, make sure you're very clear with the punishment. If you say you're going to lose an hour of PlayStation time, then they're going to be like, okay, I can still go on my iPad. You need to make that more clear because they will find every loophole and take advantage of it. I've seen it happen even in my sessions. Well, you said that I get an extra 2 minutes. They always remember that part. So and then with punishment, I'm a firm believer in positive reinforcement and rewarding, so I always think that the punishment and reward system should be connected. So if you're going to take away screen time, there needs to be a way to earn it back, and that will help foster the understanding of why it's being taken away and how do we earn it back with our behavior or other achievements. So keeping that in mind is, connecting those two. So as far as that goes, how many of you use a reward system? Oh, okay, great. I personally think reward systems are amazing. I've had kids off of medication who completely are stimulated the same way by using a reward system and by the motivational rewards. I have a prize box in my office and we use a point system. So with that being said, the reward system, please keep it simple. I know when I was a kid, I had like a multi-tiered point system that was color-coded stars, and we used it for about 3 days and then tossed it in the trash. So you really want to keep it simple so that your child can see that we're keeping up with this. If you want to talk about the learning styles, I would say you can even adjust your reward system based on the learning styles. So if your child is more figural or picture-based, I would do like marbles in a jar. If you earn a marble every time you do this, when you get to 50, we'll buy a new video game. Simple but very visual. If your child is symbolic and likes those numbers, a point system is great. You can spend the points like money. You can have a prize box. In my office, I have like a small prize box with like erasers, and then I have the bigger prize box that you can save up for and get the GameStop gift card. We have our clients who want the instant gratification, and we'll get the erasers every time. And then we have our future bankers who save and wait for the big Lego box. But it's great, and it teaches them. I think it also just teaches them about spending, but that's kind of, but I would be great for someone who likes numbers or understands math. If you don't like math, don't do the point system. If you're more semantic or verbal, I would say, give a goal like once a week. Like if you remember to bring home your jacket every time this week, on Friday we can go get ice cream. So that's just replaying over and over in their mind. Okay, I gotta remember my jacket. Jacket means ice cream. Great, I'll try to remember it. So there's different ways that you can play around with the reward systems too. So again, experiment, but keep it simple.
Just a comment too, though, really quick, is that they have to win in the beginning. It has to be doable. Otherwise, they won't buy into it.
Right.
The first couple of days, you figure, okay, if they're picking up their clothes one day a week, then you'd reward them one day a week. But then also their event horizon. If you have a little kid who say, okay, you earn this next week could be 10 years from now.
Yeah,
In their mind,
absolutely.
so you keep it short. And
Yes,
some
short,
kids, it's
simple.
like an M&M almost economy where you say, oh, perfect.
And that's why I really like the point system in my office, because they have a choice. You know, you can earn points and you can get that small reward and feel instantly gratified and proud of yourself, or you can have that long-term motivation of, if I earn enough points, I can get this Lego set. And I also allow for like bonus points. So if you do something exceptionally well, I'll add bonus points, so they know that there's that element too. Or you can add more marbles to the jar if you see that they're going above and beyond or whatnot. So just keep that in mind with reward systems. It's not a one-size-fits-all either. Go ahead.
My question about that is, like, I've tried doing things like that, and they'll get a reward, but then quickly revert back to like a bad behavior after, let's say, okay, you got your star. So then what do? Do you take that star away, or do you say, now you're not getting the star for the next time? It's almost like a push and pull constant. It's not like, oh, the whole day you were so great, you get that marble. It's like there's the ups and the downs. So how do you manage that?
I typically would take away, but explain why we're taking away, or ask them, do you think that we should take away some points? What can we do to earn it back? So kind of keep it more open. And sometimes reward systems just don't work for everyone. It really doesn't, but finding some other motivator possibly. So I always say, like, have a discussion with your child about, okay, well, what can we do to try to stop this behavior? What do you think would help?
Or even just the absence of the positive reinforcement. So it looks like you're choosing not to get your star today. Well, maybe next time.
And I always, I'm very honest with my kiddos, and I feel like, do you think that we deserved all of our points today? Or let's do a rating scale like this and tell me where you think you fall. And they're actually really honest. But, if we're below here, then maybe we don't get all the points today, and maybe next time we can try for this way and get bonus points if we do that for 3 days straight. So it's more like, I reward extra for consistency, essentially. So if you do it for longer, you get more of a reward. And if we fall back, then we start at the beginning, essentially. It's really complicated. I don't have an answer for you because it is so complicated. Some parents have that executive functioning where they can do this elaborate point system, and some it's too difficult, and it falls through the cracks. And so that's why experimenting to find what works, or like, okay, we're gonna erase this element of the reward system, but we'll keep this. But yeah, that's a great system. I love that. And the therapist probably have some dialogue that you can use. I personally never take rewards away. I take the points away from the reward system. So it just takes you longer to achieve those things instead of getting it taken away. Well,
they've achieved the reward, right? So now they feel like they can be lazy and fall back and go back to bad behavior.
So, but how do they receive their reward?
Say like the reward was a surfboard, or say it was a vacuum robot or whatever it was. So the item's there because they earned 100 points. So then they misbehave, so I'm going to take it back. And they go, take it back. I don't care. I'm leaving. I'm walking.
But you say you're in a power struggle, right? So one way to get out of that is to say, something's not working here, right? And I'm going to go to my room and I'm going to meditate and I'm going to think about this. See, that takes the air out of it. So just something that moves the needle in a completely different direction. You get out of the power struggle.
And I would, like, if you're doing points, and then I would have them start off with negative 50 points the next round, instead of saying, I'm going to take your surfboard away. Or with screen time, okay, we have no screen time this week. How can I earn it back? Well, you can do these 3 things. But of course the power struggle is ultimate. And then I have kids who just, the reward systems just do not work. No, it doesn't matter. I can threaten as many points, they don't care, they don't need the gift card. Sometimes I'll do more, kind of get them on an emotional level, that really hurt my feelings when you kicked me, or something like that. That has happened. And then they're like, oh, so finding kind of the way that it would kind of motivate them, and sometimes it's not through prizes. Sometimes it is through more of an emotional connection. But again, experiment and find something that works and make sure it's consistent.
I was just gonna, what was your name?
Ozzy.
I was just gonna tell you, so what I've done, because that used to make me so mad, like that was my button. When my child would do that, I was like, Mommy needs a break, because that was my button when she did that to me. And what I've learned, that little corner that I made for her, that is when she goes straight there, regardless. And I will get the spatula and spank your bottom if you don't get there on the count of 3. Like right now, you're all done.
So she obeys you.
And only, she didn't at the beginning. It was a huge thing at the beginning. But now, like, she'll go there and she will calm herself down because I can't handle her doing that. And she knows that's my button. Now I have to do it calmly without getting upset, so I'm probably trying. But anyways, that was my thing. And the thing I was going to ask you, and kind of what you said, the hardest thing for me is that, like, her system of learning, I swear it changes every day. Like, I have your entire list, like, made. It's, like, printed with pictures, and all the fonts are different, so it's exciting. And she looks at it, she's all good, and then she wakes up in the morning and she's like, yeah, no.
Have you had her make her own, try her own thing?
Yep.
And what does she say she prefers?
She prefers to make it all on her own and do it all, which is great, until the morning when she wakes up.
And that's probably where the exercise and the getting the dopamine activated is probably what's causing that, or it's the lack of sequencing skills. No matter how much you put the list up there, they're just going to meander and not know what to do.
So how do you teach the because that's really what
Very good point.
she needs to learn is being able to get those sequencing skills.
So in the program that Dr. Maxwell's family started and that I'm trained in, we have these workbooks that specifically train sequencing. But you can also train that at home. But essentially what this is it starts off with like following literal steps, and there's no words, there's no reading, and it tells you, okay, go up 3 steps, go down 3 steps, go up 4, back down 2. It's kind of like
and all of that is a waste of time. What should I get all the time? Does anyone else do that? That's a waste of time. That's a waste of my time.
7-year-old says that?
Oh yeah. I'm like, great. Yeah, it's not a waste of my time, so try again.
Sometimes when I first have a client come in and they're like, why am I here? I'm pretty honest with them, and I'll be like, have your parents ever told you, put your back, or go get a cup of water, put your backpack down, get out your homework, and you're like, huh? Or I remember the first thing, and I don't remember anything else you said, and they're like, yes, all the time. Exactly, it happens to all of us, and it's really frustrating sometimes. And I said, what we're going to do today is we're going to do an exercise that helps us with that. It's not going to help us overnight, but it'll help build those skills, and we're going to learn how to follow steps, and by the end we'll remember those 3 things. And they're like, okay, but we have to get them to buy in, and sometimes it doesn't work. But
You got to job it out to Jamie. That's what you got to do.
well, and you actually can find other SOI providers, so we can always try to find one for you. But regardless, even if you don't do that, I always tell parents, or like, what is it, Mother May I, or no, what is the one where it's like, or even like Simon Says is sequencing, and like, or Mother May I, like doing 3 steps and then whatnot. So games actually have a lot of sequencing involved, board games, and then also following a recipe, like doing baking and helping them out. Okay, it doesn't say on the recipe you have to get the measuring spoon out. It doesn't say, we have to hold the measuring spoon this way. Like, so teaching them, okay, well, what do you think we would do next? Well, it says get 3 tablespoons of oil. Okay, well, where do we go for that? So that can help build those sequencing skills too. So I think baking is a great way to do that at home. And I think that's how we learned our sequencing skills, because again, it's not taught in schools very much. So that's how we've become good sequencers, is like when we're driving and we're like, oh my gosh, I missed my exit and now I'm late for my meeting. I think I need to look 2 steps ahead on my directions and see what when I need to get off.
Yep.
So we've learned that through consequences. Or like my fiance like never preheats the oven. And then I'm like, get home and I'm like, that's the first step. We can't do anything else now. And we're just waiting here. Now dinner's going to be 20 minutes later. So that type of consequences also, you know, even as adults is annoying. So I'm going to wrap up. But
Yeah.
my last thing I'm going to touch on is the schools. I know this is a big one. SSTs, IEPs, 504s, all that fun stuff. I think we could have a whole panel on accommodations. We should probably
Yeah.
do that next year.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to touch on it. And Dr. Maxwell is also an expert in this area, but I'm seeing it from kind of an outsider point of view. Sometimes I will go to 504 meetings or IEP meetings, or even look over your 504s before you sign it. But one of the number one, so I always feel like if you're doing all of these interventions, meds, educational therapists, therapy, and your child is still getting bad grades in school, I think it's the lack of accommodations. If you're doing all of these things, your child is in school for 8 hours. You need to make sure that what's happening in school is really consistent and set as well. If you're doing everything at home you can, your child is doing everything, but the accommodations are still lacking. One of the things I see the most is accommodations.
Squirrels. Sorry. I'm a little bigger than a squirrel.
One of the things I see with accommodations is that the schools want to do the bare minimum, and of course that makes sense because they have so many accommodations to tackle, but that's not very helpful for your own child. So I see, you know, the bare minimum accommodations, but also just in the way that they're written out. So if it says Johnny has to get his planner checked by the teacher, okay, great, that's a great accommodation. But then we start to get to, okay, what does the system look like for this? Most of the time, you're like, well, why isn't your planner being checked? This is an accommodation. Oh, well, we asked the teacher, oh, well, he needs to come up and get it signed or stamped. If they could do that, they would probably write on the planner, you know, from the beginning. And I've never seen a child go, excuse me, I have an accommodation and you need to come check my planner. It just doesn't work. So I think a lot of schools want the child to advocate for themselves, and at some point I think that is really important, but sometimes just to get that confidence up and to get their, you know, allow them to use their strengths to their fullest, we need more support. So meaning the teacher needs to find a way to just quickly stamp that planner at the very end. You know it's tough, but it needs to be done. Or you know, instead of getting the child to say like, no child is going to say I need to take this in a separate classroom, you know, but giving them that option and reminding them of it before they take the test would be awesome. So just kind of checking in with those details of the 504s is like, who's going to initiate this, and how do I know it's going to be followed through? Meaning, I had a client who had speech as one of their IEPs, or part of their IEP, and he was autistic and in 3rd grade, and his speech therapist went on maternity leave, and she forgot to include him on the pull-out list for the new speech therapist. So for 3 months, he didn't go to speech, and he thought he had graduated from speech. So he didn't say anything. He was just like, no, we're not pulling me anywhere. And his mom just didn't ask because it was so routine, but there was no checks and balances. There was no log or report or anything like that. And then come to find out 3 months later, this whole time he should have been going to speech twice a week. And so instead, he had to go 5 times a week at the end of the year because of this mistake. But the school's excuse was, well, he should have known that he needs to be pulled out. It doesn't work that way. So, you know, making sure that there's just a lot of clarity in those before you sign off, I think is really important. And you guys already know this, but I always try to go in with as much kindness and respect as possible and a lot of empathy. If you're still getting pushback, that's the time to be a little bit more defensive or hire an advocate. Sometimes I know we know a few advocates, but they're worth it because it's investing in those, making sure those systems are in place and that you can continue with the consistency that you're working on at home and that your child is working on. So just make sure that that part of the schooling is really taken care of and that those documents are very well read and it's not just little like 3-word sentence on the accommodations. I always start with the teacher, talking to the teacher first, and if you're not getting anything from them, I'd go to the learning specialist, whoever helps create the accommodations or IEPs for you. But I would keep in mind that a lot of teachers don't have a developmental background or they don't understand learning disabilities. So they're just as lost as a lot of us are as far as what to do. I've had kids who just completely walked all over me as far as like, I can't work, but I can totally play a game. We're totally fine when it's game time. And you know, so, and I've totally fallen for it. Like, oh, you're not feeling well, I'm so sorry. So like kind of coming up with boundaries with the teacher, I think would be helpful. You know, saying I really want to find a compromise here as far as like how, you know, maybe having him have 5 minutes to readjust and then saying we need to try to get through at least half of the spelling test. Can we try to do that? Or, you know, coming up with a goal with the teacher. And if it's really bad, you might have to put it in the accommodations. Sure, you can have the chunk time, you can have minimize the amount, or you can do 10 today, 10 tomorrow. Everything with an ADD brain is making it manageable so we don't feel overwhelmed or overloaded. So whatever the teacher can do, we still want them to learn. We still want to have them try the spelling, but we can adjust that part. And if you work with outside providers, have everyone sign a release right away so that everyone can be on the same team and talking. We're working on this, it's working really well, let's try to implement it in the classroom. So I would sign those releases immediately so that the school and therapists can talk, or the school and educational therapists, or whatever you're doing, they can all be on the same team.
That's great.
Keep that in mind.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.